Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Simone here, and as you can tell, it's Halloween. I have a little hat thing, but it makes me look really stupid, so I'm not gonna use it. But that's fine. Happy Halloween, everyone. I hope that you're having a wonderful, wonderful day, whatever you're choosing to do, and you're being very safe about it. But today I wanted to do a spooky book recommendations video. I will link down below the tag that I did that was Halloween based a couple of weeks ago. That went up a little bit early. But yes, I wanted to, I filmed it today that I'm filming this, but they're going up separately. But yeah, so today I'm going to do some spooky book recommendations. I've got quite the variety. I have some thrillers, I have some kind of like spooky books with monsters, I have a graphic novel as well. So yes, let's get started. So the first one I wanted to talk about is my favourite Stephen King book that I've read so far, and that is Salems Lot by Stephen King. This one is Stephen King's kind of answer to a vampire novel. It follows a man who is a writer, and he grew up in the town of Jerusalem's Lot, known as Salem's Lot, but he grew up there and then he goes back there when he's much older. And he wants to write a book about this creepy old house that was in Salem's Lot. And actually he wants to move into that place, but when he gets there he finds out two people have just recently bought this house, and he wants to find out about them because something seems a little bit off. And I love this. I think it's really classic horror. It definitely has that kind of like vampires and that kind of vibe, but it's not your kind of more recent I think it's definitely not like Twilight vampires, let's put it that way. But it's the vampires, you know, they eat, they kill, it's really creepy. There is also an adaptation that's really, really old, and I'll see if I can find it and post a picture here. And maybe I'll link the description down below for you. But it's literally one of the funniest adaptations, because the vampires, I don't even know what they're supposed to look like, but they do not look like vampires. But I find the whole thing really funny anyway. I personally really enjoyed it, but yeah, I think it's a great one, especially if you have read other Stephen King books before. It is quite long, but not as long as his other books, and yeah, it was a firm favourite of mine. The next one I wanted to talk about is The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman, which is, it's not a very scary book, it's a middle grade. So I think if you're a bit more nervous about reading really spooky, scary books, this one has that kind of like monster element, but it's definitely not overly scary. This basically follows a young boy named Bod who, after certain things happen, ends up in a graveyard when he's a baby, and the ghosts bring him up basically. So you have the ghost element, and there are certain other like spooky elements, but it's, like I say, it's not a super scary book. So if you want to read a nice spooky book on Halloween but you don't want to be terrified, that is definitely a great one to go with. Next up is another one that has that kind of like vibe, but it again is not super scary, is The School for Good and Evil by Simone. This, I've only read the first book in this series, and I think it's like a trilogy, or maybe it's 4 books now, but I really enjoyed the first one. This basically follows two girls, Agatha and Sophie, who are best friends. Agatha is like your stereotypical evil villain, but she's actually really lovely, and Sophie is your typical princess in terms of aesthetics, I should say, but she's actually a little bit more mischievous and a bit more evil. And so they live in this town where basically two children are taken every year, and they get taken to the School for Good and Evil. One goes into the School for Good and one goes into the School for Evil, and these two are taken and they're quite happy to be taken. However, Sophie ends up in the School for Evil, even though she is this like princess looking girl, and Agatha gets taken into the School for Good, even though, like I say, she's got stereotypical black hair, looks very kind of gothic, and is stereotypically evil looking, and it's about that. It's wonderful. I really love it. I really need to continue on with the series. It is a bit more of a slow read, I found, but yeah, I think it's definitely fun, and it's also got the boarding school vibe if you're really interested in that and you love it. Next up is something that is a bit more gothic in terms of atmosphere, and that is Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier, although to be honest with you, you could read any of Daphne du Maurier's books. This particular one follows a girl named Mary Yellen, who after her mother dies, she goes to live with her aunt and her aunt's husband at a place named Jamaica Inn, and there is a lot of kind of gothic description in this, of kind of rolling hills and countryside, and on her way, Mary Yellen is advised by the coach man basically not to go because of the negative sort of situation around the Jamaica Inn, and it kind of goes from there. There are lots of secrets and creepiness, and again, I wouldn't say it's super scary, but it's definitely got the gothic kind of I don't know, the feelings of it. Yeah, it's definitely a creepy read. So yeah, I would 100% recommend. Like I say though, you could read any of Daphne du Maurier's books because they're all similar vibe. Next up we have TheThree by Sarah Lotz, which is a book I haven't talked about in a really long time. I read this a few years ago now, and it's a thriller which basically is where I think it's 4 planes crash at the same time around the world, and there is one survivor from each of those planes. One of the there is 3 children from 3 different of them, and one of them is an adult female, and she lives long enough to deliver a message saying basically that the end of the world is coming, and it goes from there, and it's about what happens and why these people survived, and it's kind of creepy. It does have that creepy vibe. There's also a lot of kind of horror religious elements, like in terms of I don't really know how to explain it. It has got quite a lot of religious elements to it, I should say, and it has that sort of I don't know, like godly vibe, I guess. It's very strange. It's a really weird book, but definitely one that I enjoyed reading, and I would recommend that you read as well. Next up we have one which is definitely horror, and I would say if you don't like gory and you don't like horror, do not read this. In fact, I'm pretty sure don't read this author, because I feel like I've heard he's particularly horrific in his writing. This is a short story collection called Books of Blood, and it's by Clive Barker. This was my first Clive Barker book, and I haven't read anything else by him since because it actually creeped me out, which I'm not a person that finds things gory or disgusting, but this short story collection, some of them were pretty horrific. I really enjoyed the read, and it was definitely scary, and like I say, if you want to read something that's a bit more scary, definitely pick up Clive Barker, because oh my goodness me, there were some stories in there which I had to sleep with my light on for a few days, which never happens. But yeah, definitely if you want to be creeped out, then that is definitely one to go for. The next 3 I have are thrillers, because you know I do love a thriller, and although these aren't like horrific or scary, super scary, these are thrilling definitely, so I would recommend them for this time of the year. The first one is Follow You Home by Mark Edwards, which follows a engaged couple who are going on this big trip before they get married, and they get kicked off a train in the middle of nowhere, and they witness something that means that they rush back to London and they never talk about it again, and it's pretty intense. It's definitely a read that will stay with you for a while. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really wonderfully written, but yeah, definitely creepy. Then we have The Woman in the Window by AJ Finn, which is definitely not creepy in that way, but basically it follows a woman who suffers from agoraphobia, and she essentially has not left her house in a really long time, and basically she witnesses something in the window of her neighbour opposite her, and she essentially is not believed that thing has happened. It's a really interesting read. I didn't love it. I thought it was okay, but I definitely think that it, the more I think about it, the more things stick with me, so I do enjoy it. It's definitely a slow burn, like don't expect this to be kind of like fast paced and constant, but definitely something that I would say if you're interested in that kind of thing to read. One thing I will say though is it does have obviously the trope of somebody with a mental health condition not being believed, which personally really frustrates me, and it's probably one of the reasons why I didn't like this as much, but I do think that if you can get past that, you'll enjoy this book. And then the third one from that little section of 3 thrillers is Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter. Karen Slaughter is an author that is incredibly well, she writes really well, but she definitely is gory, and yeah, if you haven't read a thriller before and you don't know if you're going to like it, I would suggest not starting with hers, because it's very gory and it's quite overwhelming if you haven't read anything like it before. Personally, I loved it. I don't really want to tell you what this one's about, because the fun of it was reading it and not really knowing, but I would say Karen Slaughter's Pretty Girls is one of my favourite books of the year, so I would highly recommend it. And the last book that I wanted to talk about is the graphic novel that I wanted to mention, and that is Paper Girls Volume 1 by Brian K. Vaughan, and probably a load of other people, because generally graphic novels are written by multiple people. This one I read in September, and I actually really enjoyed it. It basically follows a group of girls, relatively young girls, who are delivering papers in their neighbourhood overnight, and there are monsters, and it's wonderful, and I loved it. I can't wait to read more of the volumes. Like I say, I've read Volume 1 and I loved that one. It's my favourite graphic novel I've ever read, so I would definitely highly recommend it. And yeah, those are my 10 Halloweeny spooky reads that I recommend that you read. Let me know if you've read any of them and what you thought of them, and let me know what you're going to be reading at Halloween. I haven't actually decided on what my actual Halloween read is going to be, so like on the day of Halloween, but I'm sure we'll figure it out as I get there. Today I wanted to do my video shout out for the wonderful Harriet Rosie. Harriet is someone who's definitely brought a lot of attention to thrillers. She hosted the Thriller-a-thon, and I just think her channel is amazing. She talks about thrillers a lot, and I love that. As you know, it's one of my favourites, so of course it's something that I'm going to really enjoy to read and definitely to see. And yeah, I absolutely love her, so go and check out her channel if you haven't already. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time for another video. Bye guys!